The 9th engagement banquet, Leo didn't show up again. This time he didn't even bother to send me a message explaining. But he doesn't know, this is the 9th time, and also the last time. The wish list he gave me is now all void. But later on, I didn't want him anymore. He knelt in front of me, holding up the wish list, his voice trembling. Linda, can you give me one more chance? My white dress on, ignoring my parents' dissuasion, I insisted on waiting at the entrance. The clock hands had already passed 11. I called him countless times during this period, but initially he didn't pick up, and then eventually just shut off the phone. Until Leo's good friend Richard appeared. He awkwardly passed on a message from Leo. Linda, Leo might have something going on. He couldn't look me in the eyes, the atmosphere was tense. My fingers twisted the dress fabric, but in the end, I nodded, turned and walked to the stage. People below were all our relatives and friends. They were used to it, but none dared to refuse to attend because Leo had sent the invitations each time I took the microphone from the MC, and my voice carried through the vibrations of electricity to everyone's ears. I used to apologize to everyone. But today, I added a sentence at the end. Please be witnesses, from today on, Leo and I are breaking up, never getting back together. After saying this, surprisingly, I didn't feel as sad as I expected. Instead, I felt more relieved. This twisted relationship finally came to an end. But I knew, not a single person believed it. After all, I had endured humiliation for Leo, they all saw it with their own eyes. But clearly, the one who originally professed love was Leo. I saw the various expressions of the crowd. My parents hurriedly surrounded me, my mother looked at me with tears in her eyes full of compassion. I comforted them and went to Richard. Richard was on the phone, looking a bit anxious. I knew who was on the other end of the call, someone I couldn't reach. It turned out, it wasn't that the call couldn't get through or his phone was off, it was that he had simply blocked my number. When he saw me approaching, he seemed more composed, even revealing an expression of as expected. I didn't care what he was thinking, instead I reached for his phone. Tell me, where are you right now? The voice on the phone suddenly changed to someone he probably didn't want to see at the moment, and there was silence on the other end. He wanted to stay silent as usual, let me give in first and then forget these things. I lowered my voice, saying coldly, I don't want to argue with you, tell me where you are now, I have something to discuss. The call was hung up. But soon, an address popped up on Richard's phone. I picked up the keys to drive over. Richard tried to stop me, smiling in an attempt to help. Linda, I'll drive you. I bypassed him, no, thanks. Richard didn't suspect anything, thinking I might still need a ride somewhere, but only I knew I didn't want to have to call a cab later. Leo had sent the location to a bar. People at the bar entrance were already used to seeing me in a dress and unfazed. I made my way to the designated spot, until I reached the door of a private room. The door was wide open, and I saw Leo sitting on the couch, with a girl in his arms. I walked straight in, and the revelry in the room abruptly ceased. Richard followed me in, trying to explain on the side. We hadn't gathered as a group of friends in a while, Leo had missed it too. Missed it for so long? Less than a day, and you miss each other so much? My harsh words made Richard pale. He hadn't expected me to be so uncompromising today. Leo's gaze had been on me since I entered, and when he saw my altercation with Richard, he just gave a slight cold look, without saying anything. I walked up to him, opened the wish list in his arms. In front of him, I took out a pen without hesitation and viciously crossed out the last star on it. Leo frowned, looking at me in confusion. What are you trying to do now? I shook my head, pushing the wish list towards him. This wish list, you gave me, I don't want it. And you, Leo, I don't want you either. The atmosphere in the room turned frightfully cold. Leo's deep, dark eyes remained unchanged, as if I hadn't just said I wanted to break up with him, but was asking him to come home for dinner. In this tense atmosphere, only the unfamiliar girl in the room dared to speak up. She sneered at me from Leo's embrace. Leo, you see, anyone and everyone dares to seduce you, resorting to such tricks. It's so ridiculous, isn't it? But as people around her echoed her words, they looked at her with sympathy. And in the next moment, Leo kicked her to the ground without a trace of emotion. The beauty moaned in pain on the floor, but Leo coldly ordered, "Get her out of here." One moment she was cradled in his arms like a treasure, the next she was discarded like worthless trash. That's how Leo was. He could insult me, but he would never allow anyone else but him to disrespect me in even the slightest way. I had always known he loved me. Yet in his alternating hot and cold love, I hesitated, unable to let go. The girl was dragged out, and Leo looked back at me. "You want to break up with me?" I didn't respond directly, just replied, "You broke the promise. It was you who didn't keep your word." The word promise seemed to enrage him, and as I walked out of the private room, I heard the sound of something breaking behind me. When I turned back, I was met with his mocking gaze. The bottle shattered on the ground, and the wish list lay soaked in alcohol. Walking out of the bar, my parents texted to check on me. I replied, "Everything is fine," and got into the car. But sitting in the driver's seat, I hesitated to start the car. Instead, I involuntarily glanced at the sky outside the window. The sun was not too bright, but it was warm, just like the day Leo confessed his feelings to me. The boyish shy look in his eyes was still vivid in my mind. He was embarrassed but tried hard to act casual, handing me a book. "Linda, I know I have a bad temper and many bad habits. I'm giving you a wish list. If I make you happy, draw a star on it. If I make you sad, erase a star. I promise to make you happier than sad whenever you are with me." He said it at that time, and he kept his word. There were few stars crossed out in my wish list. How could I not be moved by this rebellious yet caring boy who held me at his heart? But later, even though we loved each other, he never trusted me. Also, because of a forced agreement that was broken, none of the agreements he made with me later counted. Like the engagement, which he always initiated but never attended. He kept punishing my faults with broken promises. It often made me wonder, do we really love each other? Then why do we have to torment each other like this? But, I don't want to think about it anymore. I turned the steering wheel and left all those memories behind. From now on, Linda no longer needs to be followed by Leo's name. Walking into my house, my parents were anxiously sitting in the living room waiting for me. As they saw me, they quickly stood up to check on me. They sat me down on the sofa. "Linda, what about you and Leo this time? You've broken up, and you won't get back together, right?" Saying this sentence again, I felt much relieved this time. But my mom couldn't help but burst into tears. She touched my hair with affection. "It's our fault. If it wasn't for you going abroad for the sake of the family, you and Leo would have been fine." Not even my reserved dad could hold back his tears. I shook my head and said seriously, "Without that incident, Leo and I wouldn't have lasted long." Breaking up with Leo was not a hasty decision, but a well-considered one. He was possessive like a lion, and I was like an eagle aspiring to higher places. We were both strong-willed, yet unwilling to compromise with each other. Our different ideologies would only continue to grind down the remaining love we had for each other. At night, I lay in bed, looking at the stars outside the window. During the 2 years abroad, I had been looking at the stars every night, thinking of Leo back home. We promised each other to be together always. Until after the college entrance examination, my beloved brother had a car accident. Unable to find the culprit, our family fell into grief during that time. My brother, 6 years older than me, had taken over the company early on. My parents, who were in their 30s or 40s when they had me and my brother, were now struggling in their old age. Various forces were eyeing our family's company. I couldn't just give away my parents' hard-earned company. So, after locking myself in the room for a few days, I told my parents decisively that I wanted to study abroad. Leo was the last one to know about this news. I thought he would unconditionally support me, but I never expected him to react so strongly. And so, we began the Cold War. Until the day I flew to the United States, Leo stopped me at the airport. He begged me, saying that he would go crazy facing his brother alone without me. He said he could help me. Despite loving him at the time, under the weight of my family responsibilities, I said the harshest words to him in our argument. "Leo, Do you want to force me to become a prisoner only for you? The next day, I went to the office early. There was a bouquet of red roses in the office. It was not signed, but I knew who it was from. Every time Leo broke a promise, he would give me some small favors to cheer me up. I used to be touched by these gestures. But after truly deciding not to love him, I realized from an outsider's perspective that all these gestures didn't require much effort and could be done with a phone call expressionless. I instructed my subordinates to return the flowers untouched and told them, any gifts from Leo in the future are not allowed to be brought in, including him. For several days, I returned all the items Leo sent me untouched. He started calling me. I had no intention of picking up. As the calls became more frequent, I found them annoying and eventually blocked him. Just like he had done countless times before. So his calls ended up reaching my assistant. Holding the phone, my assistant looked embarrassed. I took the phone and hung up directly. I ordered to have that number blocked by everyone in the company. As time went by, a proud person like Leo would not continue to bother himself. Unknowingly, it had already been 2 months since I had seen or thought of Leo. During this time, Leo's family held a banquet and invited many people. It was Leo who organized the banquet. I was not initially on the invitation list. But Leo's older brother David noticed, and he personally brought the invitation to apologize at my doorstep. I graciously said it was not a big deal. We were all businessmen, only Leo would bring personal emotions into it. At the banquet, I wore a red haute couture dress, different from countless times before. I liked red, but Leo liked white. On such trivial matters, I would always defer to him. Because of my family's status, I just stood there, and people came over to talk to me with a raised glass. Suddenly, a glass was raised in front of me. David smiled warmly, his eyes sparkling a bit. Linda, you look beautiful today. Then he bowed elegantly to me like a gentleman. Miss Linda, would you do me the honor of dancing with me? Although Leo and I had broken up by then, I didn't want to get involved with Leo's family again, so I politely declined with a raised glass. I am not good at dancing, so I will spare you the embarrassment. I'll take a drink myself, you go ahead. With that, I raised my glass and drank it all. Then, would you like to dance with me, I wonder? Leo walked out from the crowd, clearly speaking to me but his eyes provoking David. I tried hard to endure. I am not good at dancing. Leo seemed to not understand the meaning in my words. I'll teach you, come with me. He was about to come over and lead me. Although people around were chatting, their eyes kept glancing in my direction. Facing this farce, the instigator remained oblivious. I suddenly felt it was boring. I didn't want to care about Leo's face anymore. So I stepped aside, letting Leo lead. Nothing. Don't you understand yet, Leo? I don't want to dance with you. He was stunned for a moment, his previously tense face showing confusion. Why? I lifted my skirt and took a few steps back under his gaze. Because I don't like you anymore. I didn't stay till the end of the banquet. I apologized to David, saying I wasn't feeling well and left early. It was only when I walked out of Leo's house, breathed fresh air, that I felt like I came alive. If it weren't for too many collaborations with Leo's family, I wouldn't want to come here again. The driver was waiting at the door and quickly opened the car door for me. I felt completely drained of energy, walking wearily. But when I lifted my foot to get into the car, a big hand grabbed me firmly. My wrist was so sore from being pulled that I couldn't help but cry out. Leo showed no intention of letting go, his eyes bloodshot, staring at me. What do you mean you don't like me anymore? I tried to push him but it was futile. The pain made my blood rush to my head. I raised the other hand and slapped him hard across his face. Taking advantage of his momentary distraction, I quickly got into the car and locked the door. I rolled down the window, looking at him, and spoke word by word. Yes, I don't like you anymore. Leo, someone who tramples on genuine feelings deserves 1,000 needles. Only at that moment did Leo seem to realize that I might really not want him anymore. He frantically pounded on the car window, but I signaled the driver to drive away, leaving him to chase after us. The driver looked back at me. Are you really not going to care about Leo? I shook my head, closed my eyes, trying to shut out the world. But the faint dull pain in my heart made me painfully aware that I couldn't completely numb my feelings. How could I not hurt? I've loved Leo for so many years. I glanced around at the people looking our way, not wanting to make a scene. I pressed him down. Let's find a cafe, I'll talk to you there. 2 iced Americano, no, I want a cappuccino. Leo looked surprised. When did you change your taste? I shook my head. I didn't suddenly change. I liked it from the beginning, so why do you always? Leo said halfway before he seemed to remember something. His face suddenly changed, turning away to avoid my gaze. But I didn't spare his feelings anymore. Because you've never asked me, you just assumed I would like the same as you. A hint of regret flashed in his eyes. About to apologize, I cut him off directly. Just like how I like red, and you like white. I'm dedicated to my career, while you prefer to play. I like to explore, while you prefer to stay here. Leo's face became even more unpleasant. He wanted to brush off by apologizing lightly, but I hit him right where it hurt. Leo, I've always compromised for you. Leo was provoked by my string of words, or maybe he was always a prickly person. Only now, his spikes were directed at me. You talk about compromising. What about when you went to the United States? Why didn't you compromise for me? Do you know how I managed these past 2 years in the capital all by myself? Every time things don't go well with you, you bring up the past. I turn cold. Back then, I didn't not let you go abroad. I even said you could come see me often. It was you who kept stalling. You always thought those 2 years were tough for you. Did you ever think about how I got through those 2 years? I never complained in front of him. I always thought we were the same kind of people. Both hustling for a livelihood. Both defending our rights. Both wanting to climb higher and meet at the peak. I thought we would understand each other, but in each matter, I found out that Leo was just an unreliable person. I can push myself to that position for my family, but Leo, you are still someone who needs to compete with your brother for business. Now, you're no longer worthy of me. With that said, I picked up my bag, ready to leave, but Leo suddenly lunged at me, kneeling in front of me, raising a wishful notebook he had taken out at some point, his voice trembling. Linda, can you give me one more chance? At that moment, the coffee arrived just in time. I picked up the cappuccino and poured it from top to bottom on his wishful notebook. In Leo's pale face, my words cruelly etched on his icy heart. Now, not only are you not worthy of me, but I also look down on you. The phone rang. The assistant was calling. I picked up and her anxious voice came through. Linda, are you really going to sell those formal dresses? Sell them all, donate the money to the mountainous areas in the name of the company. Oh, prepare me some more red dresses, the closet is too empty. I hung up the phone, staring at the closet full of white and the 9 formal dresses hanging neatly. It should have been 10, only the 10th dress Leo couldn't deliver to me. Leo stood me up for the first time at the engagement banquet. Before that, we were like a normal couple dating. We would go to the movies, we would go by the river for a breeze. It was like he was pretending to be a normal couple only to humiliate me at the engagement banquet. Until he hugged my waist, took my hand and put on a diamond ring, whispered in my ear. Linda, I really want to marry you, will you marry me? I was excited for a long time that day, and I waited a long time too. At the wedding, the 2 elders were obviously anxious, making excuses for Leo. Until someone in the crowd screamed. The big screen at the back lit up with a photo of Leo hugging a girl, with an address below. I couldn't believe it. I left everyone behind and took a taxi to that bar. I can't forget the way people looked at me at the bar entrance that day. I can't forget the look on Leo's face when I found him. He said, "You left me once, so I'll leave you once and we'll be even." I lost control that day. I lost my phone while on the way, so I wandered into the heavy rain in a daze wearing the formal dress. After that, every time he stood me up, he wouldn't even give me a reason. But he would keep making it up to me and regretting it at other times. Looking back now, I was like a fool, played around by him. And the wishful notebook has become the countdown to our break. In the office, I was typing on the computer. The assistant came in and knocked on the door. Linda, someone's looking for you. I lifted my sore neck and gestured for her to let the person in. He was in a black suit, his figure well wrapped. Quite unexpectedly, there was no thought to admire his appearance, surprised by his presence. David? Since I blocked Leo, David has become our contact point. Unlike the flamboyant Leo, he has always been very stable and courteous. I didn't believe a straightforward person like David would target Leo. He was disdainful, but Leo didn't like David, so I distanced myself from him. I invited him to sit down. He sat down without hesitation and spoke without waiting for me to ask. Leo has been very desolate since he came back that night, getting drunk with friends every night. Father asked me to inquire about the situation. I had no choice but to come and ask you. He really is useless. I messaged clients at my computer. David didn't speak again, just waiting on the side. After a while, when I typed the last word, I looked up. Seeing David still sitting upright, I felt a headache and pinched my brow. Is this all you wanted to ask? David shook his head. Of course not. Shall I leave now? I coldly gave him the boot, but David walked up to me. Are you sure you want me to leave? Surprisingly, David's expression even hinted at a hint of sorrow. I shivered with goosebumps. Luckily, David wasn't pushy. He stopped and handed a folder to me, his expression serious. Take a look, you'll find what you want inside. But be prepared before you look. I glanced at him, then took the folder. Why all the mystery surrounding this? But with just a quick glance, I froze in place. Make way. Don't stop me. I'm Linda's boyfriend. I want to see why David came here. The office door was pushed open forcefully. The assistant was knocked off balance, looking at me for help. Linda. There was a large crowd around the office. Leo stormed in, pointing at David and started yelling. What are you doing here? Linda is mine. Her business doesn't need you, and Linda doesn't need you either. I stepped forward and stood between Leo and David. Leo paused for a moment, then tried to grab me, saying, Linda, come with me. You can't be with him. I lowered my head and dodged his hand. David spoke up. I don't think Linda wants to see you right now, do you? Leo was furious and tried to grab me again. Leo was shocked by David's words, his blood boiling. He lunged at me, but I avoided his grasp. As Leo reached for me, David instinctively intervened. Leo, Linda probably doesn't want to see you, right? The noisy office suddenly fell silent. A bright red handprint appeared on Leo's face. My hand was numb from hitting him, but I didn't stop. Leo finally reacted, grabbing my wrist and through gritted teeth, asking, Linda, what are you doing? When our eyes met, he hesitated and subconsciously let go of my hand. I took the opportunity to slap him again. Leo held his face and backed away from me. I closed in on him, my eyes burning with hatred, wishing to unleash my anger on him. I squeezed my palm hard, using the sharp pain to suppress the overwhelming emotions in my heart. I told him, word by word, Leo, you have to pay for my brother's death. As the police car disappeared, Leo continued to curse David loudly. It's you. It's all your fault, telling Linda everything. You're trying to provoke us. Do you think you can win her over like this? You're dreaming. She will never love you in a lifetime. I stood there, feeling a deep chill in my heart. David approached me, his voice as gentle as a breeze. I was the one who fell for you first. His words were few, but I understood his meaning. He had intentionally provoked my brother because he couldn't stand him, but also didn't want to see me hurt. Leo was always protective of me whenever David was around for that reason. David spoke solemnly, your brother was my best friend. He knew Leo's true nature, didn't like him, but couldn't bear to see you heartbroken. Leo was worried about his poor performance in the college entrance exam and wanted you to go to another school with him. When he was discussing this with his friend, your brother overheard him. Leo begged him not to tell you, but your brother refused. Furious, Leo drove recklessly, resulting in your brother's death. I could hardly breathe, my heart felt like it was being clenched by a giant hand, the pain indescribable. Memories flooded back. Our overseas communication breakdown turned into his guilt. 8 years of affection turned into blatant provocation. My accommodation towards him turned into Leo arrogantly justifying his actions even after he killed my brother. Tears uncontrollably streamed down my face, splashing onto the ground. Over these years, I had loved a selfish and heartless person. A person who caused the death of the brother I cherished the most. I had not kept this incident a secret from my parents. Despite their pretense of happiness, I knew my brother's death was like a thorn in their hearts. On the phone, there was a long silence from the other end. I held the phone tightly, expecting them to at least scold me for bringing this disaster upon us, for my brother's death. But they didn't. Through the phone, I heard muffled sobbing, and then my father's voice replaced the caller's, vibrating with sorrow, yet trying to sound calm. "Linda, don't blame yourself for your brother's death." I couldn't hold back anymore. They flew back from Hawaii that very night. We hugged each other, crying for a long time. In the living room, my brother's photo was displayed, his youthful smile frozen at 24. My brother had always doted on me. I remembered those high school years when he came home every night, exhausted but still going out to buy the cake I liked from a faraway place. Watching me eat with a face full of cream, he would helplessly wipe my face and ruffle my hair, saying, "Linda, just be happy and do what you want. I will always take care of you." After he left, I looked at my aging parents and abandoned my piano studies to pursue business management abroad. Our family's happiness was shattered by one despicable person. My father gritted his teeth. "I want him to rot in prison." Outside the courthouse, Leo's father stopped me. He bent down, tears in his eyes, and said, "Linda, Uncle knows he's wrong, but please, forgive him just this once." The old man, nearly as old as my father but with prematurely white hair, had always been kind to me despite being strict with his 2 sons. I suppressed the bitterness in my heart and walked into the courthouse, saying firmly, "It's impossible." Behind me, Leo's uncle bowed even deeper. Inside the courtroom, Richard sat in the defendant's seat, forcibly restrained. It was clear he had caused a scene just before. Seeing me entering, he became agitated, trying to stand up, but was held back by those around him. Frustrated, he shouted at me, "Linda, please save me. You still love me, right? You don't want me to go to jail, do you?" Leo's father did not follow us inside, and David was nowhere to be seen. Clearly, they had agreed to let me handle this matter personally. The judge's gavel failed to silence Richard. I glanced at the judge and walked down from the plaintiff's spot. Richard looked slightly pleased when he saw me approaching, challenging the judge with his eyes, just like he had done countless times with David, but I stopped 3 steps away from him, looking at him expressionlessly. "You professed your love to me just to provoke your hatred towards my brother. You caused his death and now want to prevent me from going abroad. When I returned, you were convinced I had no grudge against you, and yet you blamed me as if it were my duty to forgive you without question." I poured it out piece by piece, and Richard's eyes gradually filled with panic. He wanted to argue, but couldn't find the right words. He just kept shaking his head and looking at me pleadingly. "Linda, I truly love you. Linda, can we forget the past and start anew? We can go together to pay respects to your brother. I will bow to him. Please don't reject me." Looking at his face, my stomach was churning. This disgusting person had occupied 8 years of my life. I didn't bother with him anymore. Instead, I turned to the judge and asserted firmly, "I will never forgive." The evidence is conclusive. Richard's trial soon came to an end. 25 years, that scoundrel got off lightly. He should have been put to death. Dad stared with wide eyes. I shook my head. Letting such an arrogant person waste away in jail for most of his life, coming out to nothing, would be more painful than letting him die. And I wouldn't let him have an easy time inside. David was waiting at the courthouse entrance and gestured for me to come over. But when I stood in front of him, he couldn't speak. After everything we'd been through, there was no way I wouldn't know what he was thinking, so I beat him to it and said, "Sorry, but what you're thinking, I can't do." David paused for a moment, then smiled bitterly. "So I've ruined my own chances?" I bluntly denied, "No, even without all this, I wouldn't be with you." I don't like you, plain and simple. Even though David might be a good boyfriend, he's just not right for me. I'm not going to compromise myself for someone else. David nodded, his eyes filled with regret as well as acceptance. This was also his 8 years. Just as I was about to walk away, he called out to me, "Can we still be friends then?" I stared into his eyes. Our relationship is more comfortable as business partners. A good person like him shouldn't be held back by me. Many small things kept happening after that. David slowly distanced himself from our collaboration. Leo's group of brothers also came looking for me. Leo had a bad character, but his friends were loyal. Mike showed up with a bunch of his buddies to confront me outside my company. When he saw me coming out, he loudly demanded, "Why won't you even see Leo one last time? He loves you so much, do you have no heart at all?" I replied coldly, "Would you want to see an enemy?" He wanted to say something but couldn't retort, getting red-faced with anger. Loyal, but as foolish as Leo. I had the security kick them out. Later, I married my current husband Mike, and we had a lovely child. We met during a trip, hit it off, and exchanged contact information. He's a photographer, passionate about life, and after getting to know each other for a while, he would often invite me to travel together. We saw many beautiful sights along the way. On days I had to work, he would go out to take photos. The mundane days felt thrilling with him around. Eventually, when our child was in high school, he suddenly suggested going to my old school. "I haven't been part of your past, and I'd like to see what my little girl looked like back then. She must have been stunning." As we strolled through the high school campus, passing by the honor wall, Mike suddenly stopped. He pointed to a photo on the wall, smiling brightly. "Linda, is this you?" My Linda was such a beautiful girl. The girl in the photo had her hair tied up high, a bright smile on her face, emanating a youthful energy. I was somewhat dazed. Although I focused on my arts exams back then, I never gave up on my academic studies. My exam scores were always top-notch. Leo, who was making faces and teasing me from across when this photo was taken, suddenly came to mind. The memory from 20 years ago rushed back, but his face was blurred. I realized I hadn't thought about him for so many years. But he was insignificant. I walked up to him and lightly punched his arm. "What, am I not beautiful now that I'm older?" Mike playfully held my fingers. "Of course not, my wife gets more beautiful every day." I glared at him, but couldn't help but smile. Mike gently pushed me towards the honor wall and raised his camera. "Come on, let's take a photo of my little girl." I turned and stared at my 17-year-old self, giving a big smile. "Let's freeze time right here. 17-year-old me and 40-year-old me, every step we've taken counts."